Observers speculate that former U.S. President Donald Trump seems to have new strategies for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, that he might implement if he returns to the White House. According to early 2024 reports from American media, during a 2020 meeting with European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, then President Trump discussed NATO. According to the New York Times, Trump told von der Leyen that NATO allies in Europe owe the U.S. a substantial amount of money due to inadequate defense spending. He asserted that if they did not spend 2% of GDP on defense as promised, the U.S. would not come to their defense in case of an attack. Trump added that NATO was on its last legs, and the U.S. might leave NATO if he returned to the White House. This information led many to believe that Trump might withdraw the U.S. from NATO if re-elected. However, recent insights from the conversation suggest that contrary to previous speculations, Trump might not withdraw the U.S. from NATO as he appears to have new strategies for the military alliance. Is it easy for the U.S. to leave NATO? The conversation cites Klaus Lars, a professor of history and international relations at the University of North Carolina, who argues that leaving NATO would not only be unbeneficial but could also have several negative consequences for the U.S. Lars provides several reasons for his assessment. Firstly, militarily, NATO is a robust collective defense alliance that helps Washington counter external threats. Leaving NATO would mean the U.S. loses a vast security network and a significant military force that can protect American interests and prevent the expansion of rival powers on the international stage. Secondly, NATO provides the U.S. with important economic benefits. The U.S. has long-standing economic relations with NATO member countries, particularly in Europe. Leaving NATO would damage America's trade and investment relationships with these traditional partners. Additionally, the U.S. is a major supplier of weapons and military equipment to NATO countries. Exiting the alliance would significantly reduce the revenues of the American defense industry. Thirdly, NATO brings significant political benefits to the U.S., enhancing Washington's credibility, influence, and support from the international community. Over 70 years of leading NATO, the U.S. has established deep alliances with many countries, particularly in Europe. Leaving NATO would severely harm these traditional relationships and could even erode allies' trust in the U.S. Finally, the U.S. leaving NATO would cause significant disruptions in international relations and the multipolar geopolitical world. American allies might seek other security partners, shaking America's position on the international stage. Leaving NATO would not only severely impact the U.S. but also profoundly affect the international community and global stability, said Simon Smith, an associate professor of security and international relations at Staffordshire University in the UK. Revealing Trump's NATO strategy. Politico reports that while Trump's strategies for NATO remain unclear, it is certain that he will continue pressuring NATO allies to meet the 2% GDP defense spending target. According to NATO defense spending reports, over the past 75 years, the U.S. has contributed nearly $22 trillion to NATO's defense budget. In 2023 alone, the U.S. spent over $860 billion, nearly 70% of NATO's total defense budget, while European allies contributed $375.1 billion, about 30% of the total budget. Keith Kellogg, a retired senior official of the U.S. Department of Defense under Trump, believes that if Trump returns to the White House, he might implement the idea of a two-tier NATO security system. Under this system, NATO members not meeting the 2% GDP defense spending target would not receive full defense support and security guarantees from the U.S. This idea seems to contradict Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty, which states that members must take necessary action to support an ally under attack. However, Trump's foreign policy advisors argue that the language in Article 5 does not mandate military response when an ally is attacked. Moreover, Politico suggests that if Trump returns to the White House, he might consider negotiating a strategic agreement with Russian President Vladimir Putin. This agreement would include NATO's commitment not to expand further east in exchange for specific Russian security commitments to Ukraine. The goal of this agreement would be to lay the groundwork for ending the Moscow-Kyiv conflict. However, this does not mean the U.S. would concede other possibilities, including providing large quantities of weapons to Ukraine. The conversation quotes Kenton White, a professor of strategy and international relations at the University of Reading, noting that Trump's NATO strategy remains unclear. However, recent speculations have caused instability and concern among European countries about America's future leadership role in NATO.